Welcome, welcome, everybody. Good to have you here. I know some people starting school soon, but I will say this as everyone joins, we kind of start thinking about those last few weeks. Just remember too that, yeah, when school does get going, you have work, it will start to mean it's harder to fit the SAT stuff into your schedule. So if there are big pieces of this puzzle here that you haven't done yet, try to get them in before the end of the August SAT's timeline. We do have one more practice test that we'd love to take next week. Yes, after next week's class. So we still have time on that, but just that might think about if you are going to be going back to school soon and you will not have time as soon as school starts to take another practice test, you might want to squeeze that in right before, maybe the weekend before school starts. But remember, practice test just 2 hours, not the end of the world. We are going to work on step 7 of our study plan, and that is called Master the Middle. This is probably, in my opinion, the most underrated step of the process. And it's basically about making sure that we're not making careless mistakes, but also making sure we're not getting things wrong in places where we have a fighting chance. Understanding a little bit about it is a timed exam, and we are going to have to make choices about what we cover. And so just as a preview of next week's class, when we talk about step 8, sacrifices, during that class, we're going to do a lot of really hard, bizarre questions. I'm going to try to basically stump everybody every time. So still stuff that's similar to what's on the SAT, but with the intent of really showing you how crazy things can get. And so we will do some hard questions tonight and to set that up. But mostly tonight is about really making sure we're locking in the points where we know we can get them. And these two things combined really are the closing idea before that last practice test of realizing maybe the topics that aren't really our strong suits, knowing how we kind of work through a test, especially a hard module, knowing where we might run out of time and kind of planning ahead for that. Basically making sure that, yes, if we have to make sacrifices, if some hard questions are just not gonna give us a good chance of getting points, we sacrifice them, we guess randomly, and we don't even worry about them for the sake of making sure that we've mastered that middle grouping of questions, the easy ones, the medium ones, and even some hard ones, but hard ones that have predictable qualities. So that's a really important part of the test. It is one of those things that a lot of perfectionists have trouble with. Many of you in school are not giving up on questions on a test. You're not sacrificing questions, and so you're not used to that way of doing things. But it is very important for the SAT, different kind of test, that we understand that sometimes sacrificing one question that might take us 5 minutes is worth it if it saves us 3 other questions that we know we can get right. That's more points. That one lost question is not going to outweigh 2 or even 3 simpler ones. It's not like the hard ones are worth so much more. Um, so before we get into actual practice questions, I do recommend watching this video. There's always been videos with the study plan thing. So for this week's homework, it'll all be about step 7. You will also see that a lot of these exercises you've done before. I know this apostrophes one keeps coming up. We've seen it in essential memorization, and I think it was here too. Yeah, there you go. Now, hopefully you've done it before. This is my demo one, so I haven't done it. But the idea is if you've done it and you haven't gotten 100%, do it again because apostrophes are very predictable. Positives, a lot of these things are very predictable, and we really want to make sure we're getting the predictable points. So this is the stage where we start to go back to old things and redo them with the idea that we're going to improve those scores. Some things are new in here. I feel like the Desmos regressions thing might be a little bit new. I forget what's in there. Some of these strategy ones, the plug points into equations things. Plus, there's not usually a lot listed here, but I wanted this one to stand out. If you go to our filter for step 7 and click videos, this playlist, How to Score X, is a very good playlist. I do talk about it in this video. It's a playlist of videos that kind of explain what steps go with which scores. So if you are at a 670 and you're trying to get a 700 in reading, I have a video that is how to score 700. And the idea is that you're slowly working your way up. It's not like you can just do everything at once, but you can focus on the pieces that matter most to get you that next level. And so that's a great playlist. It really breaks things down into more manageable pieces, and it can help you understand why, if your score is stuck at a certain point, maybe you're having trouble getting past that point and getting to the next level. So, really great playlist. Again, I'll put that in the homework. Definitely really important. And there are some other ways to get some extra questions, new questions for this master the middle step. So, we'll talk about them maybe a little bit later. As always, if you have questions, feel free to chat or you can interrupt. You guys are very quiet, so interrupting is fine. But yeah, this is going to be a more middle of the road step, one that is often neglected. But yes, even if you are only getting the hard questions wrong on your practice tests, you still need to focus on the easy and medium questions on the practice and the practice test. If you're not getting them right efficiently, you are potentially that's the reason you're getting the hard ones wrong. A lot of people think that they're getting the hard ones wrong because they're struggling with the hard questions themselves. They may be going too slow on the hard questions. What I hope you get away, what you get from today is that actually being very efficient on the easy and medium questions is much more important for getting the hard questions right than just focusing on the hard questions themselves. If you're not efficient here, you're going to be wasting time that we need to devote to the hard questions. So with that in mind, let's get to, oh, here it is. Let's get to our thing here, our television, go into that, and I will put a new question up. It's going to be an easy one to start things off. So let me go to that, and here we go. Let's do this one. And I'll make this a little bit bigger in a sec. There we go. Yes, nice, easy question to start us off. Let's put that up there so I can look at myself. Do one of these. I gotta make it a little smaller. There we go. Oh, interesting. It's saying you're all getting it wrong when you're all getting it right on my end, but we're going to see what happens when I hit the button because it should be right. I don't know why it's showing that. Um, but yeah, go for it. This should be quick. This is an easy question. So this is meant to just literally test something that is just a knowledge situation. You either know it or you don't. Line J is defined by y equals negative 5x plus 4. Line J is perpendicular to line K in the xy plane. What is the slope of line K? This is something you've got to be getting very quickly. The answer here, I'm just going to go ahead and do it because if you're still thinking, you don't know it. It should be 1/5. And yes, there we go. There we go. Now, why is it 1/5? This is just a rule that perpendicular slopes are going to be negative reciprocals. Negative reciprocals. So I know it shows up as a decimal here in the answer, but if we think of the slope of this line as negative 5 over 1, then the reciprocal is flipping the fraction, and negative just means flip the sign as well. So the 1/5. So 1/5 is 0.2. So that's that. This is a good example of an easy question. And basically what we're going to do here for both math and reading to start things off is we're going to look at how the SAT turns an easy concept into a hard question and why it's so important to make sure we've got those easy concepts down when we have easy questions, because otherwise the hard ones are going to just be completely chaotic for us. So this is the kind of thing, not to rub it in, but if you don't know this fact by now, this is the kind of thing you really should be committing to memory in some way. Hopefully something in my practice portal allows you to do that. There are some little flashcard things and some quizzes on that. I think actually quizzes, XY plane. There you go, linear systems, parallel, perpendicular, number of solutions. Great little quiz there. Easy to do some questions there every once in a while. This is easy and it would take you 2 seconds if you know it, and it would be a guaranteed right answer if you know it. And then what they're going to do is they're going to use a fact like this to build what would be like a medium question. So let's take a look at this one. Notice it's still about perpendicular lines, but there's a bit more to it. So they've twisted it up a bit, but that shouldn't bother us. So give this one a shot. It'll take a little longer. Hmm. And I'm seeing some speedy answers. This is pretty good. This is what we want. We want speed here. I also think this is a great example of how the strategies really help us when the SAT twists things up. I think of this as a plug points into equations question. I instantly recognize I'm going to need that same fact about negative reciprocals. But I can't get the slope of line K if I don't have the slope of line J. So they give me stuff about that, but I'm going to need to build an equation. Now I could find the slope using some points. I can also, if I'm really thinking smart about it, remember, plug points into equations, they don't have to give me the equation in order for me to be able to use that strategy. So this is all stuff that I'm doing very quickly, is I know plug points into equations is my strategy. I see a point. I know y equals mx plus b is the equation for a line, so I'm just going to see what I can do with that, right? It crosses the y-axis at 6. That's just code telling me that the y-intercept is 6. So again, being able to untwist something like that. They didn't say y-intercept, but they basically did. And then we have a point. So 2 is the y coordinate. We don't know the slope, but we do know the x. And so suddenly this just becomes a solve for x situation. All of these things are happening for me very quickly. Let me divide minus 6, so that's going to be negative 4, 5m. So divide by 5. So negative 4/5 is the slope of this particular line. And then again, negative reciprocal, flip it and reverse it. And there you go. This should be 5/4 and no bookmark necessary on something like this. Now, I did see as you guys were working on it, some of you maybe changed it as I wasn't looking, but I did see some slight potential errors. Maybe you caught them. That's good. I saw some negatives in those answers for a little bit. I saw 4/5 as an answer. I saw some fractions entered wrong. It looks like everyone fixed it. That's awesome. But this would be the kind of mistake that if you're making it on a practice test or and even just when you're doing random questions, that's really bad. This is a medium difficulty question. It is not something we can afford to get wrong. It's very predictable. All the steps are very predictable. We do need this fact about perpendicular lines, and we do need to know how to build the equation of a line or kind of plug points into equations for linear equations. But that's how the SAT starts to make things more difficult, is they take something very simple, the perpendicular lines rule, and then they start layering other things on top of it, right? Let's make them find the original slope, right? Let's talk about a y-intercept in a kind of weird way, right? Let's see what they can do. But ultimately, every little step of this question is something that's very easy, something that we do again and again. And so medium questions are going to start to piece together a couple different topics or maybe involve some sort of annoying little twist. But if we can handle those, then we're going to be very ready for when we get something like this. Let's let it load. There we go. And look, it looks like a nightmare, but you can't let that panic you. Remember, hard questions are just easy questions combined and in medium questions combined. And we have tools to help us with this. So this doesn't seem to use that word perpendicular, but I'll give you a hint. When we say a line is tangent to a circle, we know it's forming a right angle, right? So here's my circle, here's my line. So that radius of that circle is going to form a perpendicular angle to the tangent line. So again, what makes this hard is they talk about perpendicular slopes without saying it. They're talking in code, but it's still the same fundamental rule. If we don't know that perpendicular slope thing, we can't get this right. But if we do know it, we have a fighting chance. So this one's harder. Feel free to take some time on it. There are some things that help us for sure. I've seen some bookmarks already. That's good. That's fine. But really try to force your way through it. I promise. This is easy. If you need to, remember, maybe turn on that training mode, right? You'll get your little plug points and new equations help guide. Maybe that gives you some ideas. In fact, why don't I just do it? What do I have? Well, looks like I got some equations here. Do I have points? Maybe. What's this? Talking about intercepts, maybe that helps. Talking about a graph. They don't give me one, but they're talking about it. It's not function notation. It's not a story. Do I have to solve for any of these letters? Doesn't seem that way. Can I arithmetize? I don't know. Think about it. Nicely. This is a new question that I wrote. So I checked it. I'm pretty sure it's all good. And I will say, as a preview of next week's class, right, when we talk about sacrifices, if you look at this and you're like, no freaking way, that's fine. There might be other things that are near the end of the math module, either one, the first module or the second, where you're like, oh, I can do this one. This one seems more understandable to me. That's all fine. This is a fine thing to say, I'm gonna save it for last, right? We never really want to give up. We just say, all right, I'll save this for last, even if it's not the last question. But there's a lot of stuff here that really entices me. Again, that idea of a tangent, meaning perpendicular, tangent equals perpendicular. I can't fit it all, but you get the idea. That's really helpful. Plus, oh, these letters. I love these letters. I know you hate them, but I love them. Why? Because, let's do that. Kind of extend this guy there. Then one of these. So what am I doing? Drawing some axis lines. I got a y-axis. I got an x-axis. Now, it's not quite on target, but I meant for it to be that this right here is both the origin and the center of the circle. So when it says it has a center HK, I, from the start, am just arithmetizing. There is no chance I'm going to solve this thing with that many letters. No chance. So I'm making the origin the center because I'm lazy. And A has to be greater than H, B has to be greater than K. All that means is these have to be, this has to be a point in that quadrant, right? So I drew it that way automatically, but that's all that means. So that's great. But yeah, finish the thought. We're making HK 0, 0. Can we make AB something? Well, my first thought is let's make it 1, 1. In fact, let's change the color here so we can see it better. 1, 1, right? So that's this point right here, AB, right? That's the point where it's tangent to the circle. That's the point where we have perpendicular slope. So I know that in order to find the y-intercept of this line, I probably need the slope of that line because that, again, plug points into equations. I'm thinking at some point I'm getting to a y equals mx plus b situation. I know they're asking me for that b. So I have the slope and I have a point. I'm good to go. Plug points into equations, always on my mind. Well, I have an equation. I want the b. That means I got to get that slope because I have a point, right? AB is the point. Now, the one thing that bothers me a little bit, if I start doing the slope formula, right? So that's y1 minus y2 over x1 minus x2. And I do the 1, 1 and the 0, 0, right? I'm going to do 1 minus 0 over 1 minus 0. I get that my slope is 1. And that bothers me a little bit because that means then the perpendicular slope is going to be -1. And I worry about that because I can negate it, but flipping that fraction, right? The reciprocal of 1 over 1 is just 1 over 1. And because I'm experienced with arithmetizing, I'm like, that might result in two answers being right. So maybe I make a little bit of a change and I just make this point slightly different, right? So this is a case where I might get a little deep into my solution and then just go, well, let's maybe do 2 and 1 instead. That way I have a little variety. Now it's 1 minus 0 over 2 minus 0, right? So that's 1/2, right? So now 1/2, the flip version of that is going to be -2, right? So this happens, and I did that on purpose to kind of show you, like, you don't have to be perfect. And even if we had continued with the 1/1, we wouldn't necessarily be in trouble. I don't know. I genuinely don't know if that'll give us multiple answers that work. I'm worried, and so I'm going to change things up. But this is a great way to approach arithmetizing or any really of the strategies is feel free to adjust as you go if you start to sense trouble. So that's an advanced adjustment, but I think with practice it gets easier. So now, right, I have the slope of this radius, which is the slope formula I did for these 2 points, the AB point and the 0, 0, right? So that's just 1/2. If I'm making a mistake, let me know. It's definitely possible I messed something up. So, right, 2 minus, okay, that should work. Now I have the slope of this line and I have the point AB. So 1 is equal to -2 times the x is 2 plus b, right? So -2 times 2 is 4. So let's add 4 to both sides. That gets rid of that. And we get 5 is equal to b. So now I have what I want, right? What's the y-intercept of the line? It's 5. But obviously, these answer choices make it chaotic, and so I've got to do some arithmetic to figure out which of these things gives me 5. It looks scary. Let's get a little bit more space. But how do I move it? Oh, like this? That's fine. I know there's a way to do it, but oh well. So let's just go now and go through the choices. And let's use green here. So choice A, right, is, we gotta be careful. So A is 2. So 2. Now it's because H and K are 0, that makes this easy. That's 2 times 2 over 1 minus 0, right? So that's 1 minus 1. So that's 4 minus 1. That's 3. No, doesn't work. Choice B. So that's 2 times 2 over 1 plus 1. 4 plus 1 is 5. So that looks good. But remember, I got to check everything because just in case. So C is 2 is A, 1 minus 0, 1 over 2 minus 0 plus 1. So that's 1 plus 1 is 2. No. And then finally D, we'll squeeze in over here. That's -2, 1 minus 0, 2 minus 0 plus 1. So that's -1 plus 1, that's 0. So after all that, I do get an answer. And thank God it's the right one. Now that's a lot. That's a lot, this question, right? This is definitely, again, something that a lot of you can sacrifice without really jeopardizing the score. I would rather you sacrifice something like this and make sure that the previous two questions that we did are right. Now, on an SAT, you're not going to get 3 questions that all involve perpendicular lines, but the point is the same, is there's going to be stuff that's really straightforward. We either know the facts or we don't. Those are the easy ones. Then that middle zone of questions, even in the hard module, there's plenty of these kind of middling questions, numbers like 5 to 15, not 5 to 14. That's where we are going to have things that are a little trickier than usual, but they're still just changing something that we're very familiar with. That's very easy. They're changing it in some way. They're making us do it backwards. They're making us think about it without being direct about what we're supposed to think about. They're adding another step, another layer. They're bringing two topics together. All these different ways that they twist things up. We just need to be prepared to understand the underlying topic. When it gets to a really hard question like this, it's still the same thing. It's just there's a lot more layers. But I felt pretty confident on all of these because I'm bringing together both my knowledge of perpendicular lines and my knowledge of the strategies on the SAT. So if you just told me in the easier medium question to find the y-intercept of a line that's perpendicular to another, that would be pretty straightforward, right? I could do that. It's a little annoying, but I can do it. Here, they did that in a coded way by talking about a circle, and they did it by removing all the numbers. But one of my favorite things to ask myself when I'm looking at a question is, why is it hard? What don't I like about the question? What makes me not want to do it? And I try to be specific here, and you should too. When you're confused, try to give yourself a reason. I'm confused because this is hard because. If you can name the because, you're almost certainly naming the step that you need to do to make it easy again, to turn a hard, twisted question back into at least a medium question. So for me, what makes this hard? There's no numbers. There's a whole lot of letters. And what's my main strategy for getting rid of letters? Unless they tell me to solve for them, I'm going to arithmetize. I'm going to make things up. And I'm going to be lazy when I do it. 0, 0. Beautiful, beautiful thing. So what do we think? Is this, I think, again, we'll do more of these next week, but this is where we're headed. And if you have trouble with the easy and medium ones, then yes, this is going to be off the table for you. But if you've mastered those middle ones and you can do those really fast and see the strategies and the way the middle ones work really well, then this is gettable. It's got a few more steps, but it's gettable. Any questions on this before we switch over to seeing a similar thing in the reading section with the grammar?
Yeah, how'd you get the slope of the line?
I used this formula here. Let's get a little yellow, right? So slope formula is, you might have learned it as y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. It doesn't matter. The ones and the twos are just there to keep track of the points. So I used this as my first point, and this is my second. So more accurately, I used the 2, 1 as my first point and 0, 0 as my second. So that gave me the slope of the radius. And then using the rules for perpendicular lines, I got messy here, but basically, if the slope of the radius is 1/2, then the slope of the line is -2/1, the perpendicular rules.
All
Did that
right.
clarify?
Yeah.
Cool.
I
Yes.
have a question.
Go for it. Yeah.
Um, I know you were doing like 1-1 before, but if you like stayed with 1-1 or you picked another point there, would that still work or would it have to be like 2-1?
I think that choice C would have given me the same thing. I think that's because notice how choice C and B are the same, except the fraction part is flipped,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if I had stuck with 1, 1, then I would have had 1 times 1 over 1 plus 1. So that's 2.
That's yeah.
And then
Gotcha.
that's B. And then C would have been the same thing 1 times 1 over 1 plus 1. And I would have been annoyed. So that doesn't, it's not the end of the world that happens. So if you can try to think ahead and maybe choose numbers that will prevent that from happening. But I would also say don't think too hard because if you spend a minute trying to find the best numbers, you might have wasted a minute that you could have just used solving it. So I would say that move for me was from experience. But if that happened to me, I wouldn't worry about it. I would have then just gotten rid of A and D and then picked a new number anyway to get a different slope. And then I just need to make sure that my slope doesn't have that same property of being 1/1 or -1/1. So yeah, it's frustrating when that happens, but it doesn't mean you failed. It just means you got unlucky.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Good questions, guys. Good questions. So yeah, this is challenging, but let's move into the reading. I'm going to do a little grammar first because that's a nice. Basically, I like to start with math when we're talking about easy, medium, hard because it's very easy to understand. Grammar also has that property. So I will preface this by saying this is an easy question. Ideally, like with most grammar questions, you're able to recognize which rule is being tested. If you have trouble with that, remember the training mode includes a list of rules for the grammar part. So cheat a little. And so most of you are already going quickly through this. This is awesome. This is an easy one, so we want to get this fast. Hopefully you recognize these are a bunch of verbs, right? And then there are multiple verb tense rules. Knowing which one matters can be very important. So here, this is that to and ing rule that you've probably heard. I know we've talked about here, but also has come up in different lessons and stuff like that, which just means that this is maybe about sentence structure. But most of you are going to just read it and say, okay, Matthew Brady, a prominent studio photographer in 19th century America, established his reputation by capturing detailed portraits of notable figures during the Civil War era, including his extensive documentation of military leaders, which laid the foundation for modern photojournalism. Sounds great. No problems, right? And that's the thing with easy grammar questions is most of the time just follow your instincts. They'll be right. And that's that. And that's good, except then when they start to get a little harder, we might trust our instincts too much. And that's where things can get a little out of hand. So here, I think without really even talking about grammar rules, we can confidently pick an answer. Let's look at a medium question that's still testing that to and ing rule. My ampersands are terrible. Okay. So this one is a little harder. Now we might be getting it based on sound, but that might also get us in trouble. We would love to have a little bit more definitive proof underlying this one because that means we're not going to fall for the trap. And since we're all there, let's see, did you fall for it? Some of you did. Some of you picked A. Now, what gives? That sounds fine, right? He masterfully combined bold brushstrokes, dramatic lighting, and unconventional poses to capture his subject's characteristics in ways that were imitated by generations of artists long after Coltrane's death. Sounds fine, right? But that's the difference between an easy one and a medium one is I actually think both A and B sound right. And this is where remembering what this rule is testing is super important. It's about the structure of the sentence. What dictates the structure of the sentence? The punctuation. Now, if I know that this is the main strategy for these grammar questions, I need to know what I'm dealing with before I get in there because I know when they start messing with me, they're going to find ways to tap into my instincts that trap me, that trick me, that make me think I'm right when I'm wrong. This is a good example of that. A is fine, except for the fact that right before that blank is a comma. And we wouldn't use a comma for a to kind of verb. We would just say something like, to shorten it a bit, he combined, I'm not going to do a million things, but how about brush strokes and poses to capture the subjects, his subjects. Let's just do that. Right, so that's a shortened, messy handwriting version of the sentence, but I think if that's the case, let's do down here, it's pretty obvious that this is right because it sounds pretty smooth and there's no other commas distracting us. So that's the thing with to capture is it is a verb form that doesn't really get commas. It just combines with another verb. And in this case, ironically, combined is the other verb, right? He combined these things to capture his subjects. There's a slight difference in meaning if we go to the ing version. It changes the way we're trying to say like cause and effect almost, but I don't think that's really what's going on here at all. It has nothing to do with our interpretation of the sentence. It has everything to do with that comma. If we have an ing version of the verb, we are adding on an extra clause, and the comma is showing that. But look what the twist was. There's other commas here. And these other commas have nothing to do with this comma at the end. The commas after brushstrokes and lighting are there because this is a list of three things, right? Bold brushstrokes, dramatic lighting, and unconventional poses. And so the SAT is hoping that with all these commas, we just kind of lose track of the one that matters most. But if we're going into a grammar question knowing that, especially in the hard module, we're going to get these kind of little twisted things, then we have a little bit of a fighting chance. We know that this to and ing rule, the traps involved in it, have to do with misunderstanding the structure, missing punctuation. That's really important. And even though punctuation is not showing up in these answer choices at all, it has to show up in your thought process to guarantee that you do not fall for a trap. Really important here. That's why today, master the middle. This would be a bad mistake. This would be a bad mistake on a test. It's gettable. It's following the rules. It's a little twisted. It's a little harder. That's what makes it a medium question. But these kinds of twists are predictable. It's very likely they're going to give you a to and ing question where it comes down to that comma before the blank. So anticipate the trap and you're much less likely to fall for it. Let's look at a hard one. And again, it's the to and ing rule. But here, I think this would be a little harder to recognize that. I would look at these choices in the midst of a test and I'd be like, oh, what is this testing? Well, what's changing? Seems like the verb is changing, right? Considered, is considered, consider, and there's punctuation changing. Now, I guess there is a to. I don't see an ing, but that's the thing with the verb tense rules, or really with any grammar. Limited menu. It's either singulars and plurals. We talked about that. This to and ing thing. Or it's past, present, future. And I'm telling you it's to and ing, but if we know the verbs are changing, doesn't seem to be about the singular plural. The comma tells me it's not really about this. So my brain's here. To be clear, this is a hard one. Not to say that anyone's wrong, but just this is what a hard version of this rule looks like. All right, cool. We're still picking. Some people are maybe changing some answers. That's fine. Let me start thinking about it, though, or showing you the way I would think about it. I would absolutely look at these answer choices first, do exactly what I just showed you here, and realize, okay, this seems to be about verbs. It seems to be a weird version of the to and ing rule, which means it's about sentence structure. So I have to pay attention to the sentence structure. So I'm going to start reading. Thomas Young's famed double slit experiment is considered truly groundbreaking for what it revealed. Okay, that sounds pretty good. But that tells me it's probably not right because that's a little too easy. This would be something I'd probably find in the hard module. And just the way these answer choices look, I'm like, this is going to mess with me. So I got to be careful here. And the reason it's not right is I got to keep reading. Thomas Young's famed double slit experiment is considered truly groundbreaking for what it revealed about the nature of light is what? For various reasons beyond anything Young could have imagined, still performed regularly by physicists to this day. If I know the to and ing rule is about sentence structure and I don't read the full sentence, I am just handing them a wrong answer. I am just rolling over and letting the SAT have at me. That is not good. You've got to make sure you are not opening yourself up to these kinds of mistakes. You got to read everything. And as soon as we get to it's like, what the heck is going on here? This is an odd sentence. I have to think about how this all fits together. I get the sense that these other commas are telling me something is extra, right? So is still performed regularly by physicists to this day. That flows. This little piece here, these other commas, they're inserting something in the sentence. So let's start clearing stuff out. Thomas Young's famed double slit experiment is considered truly groundbreaking would be its own sentence. And then we're getting lost in all this stuff. I need to also include a comma to separate out this other piece here, right? So basically kind of like this bit. That way the sentence reads, Thomas Young's famed double slit experiment is still performed regularly by physicists to this day. I've found the sentence. It's all chopped up on purpose, but I found the sentence, and that's it. Now I've got it. I know I'm right. They're going to mess with you. This is a classic kind of way that they make the SAT grammar questions hard, is they try to disguise what rule it is. And so if we're really good at identifying them, we can still get past that. But then, like I said, it's not just about memorizing the rule, it's about memorizing the traps that come with the rule. And if they're messing with sentence structure, I have to read the full sentence and I have to consider all the different parts of that sentence. I'm not just interested in the comma that's in the choice, I'm interested in all the commas in the sentence. If I think about all of them, I can piece this thing together. It's a weird sentence. It is not a sentence that you are going to hear the right way just by reading it. It is way too weird on purpose. So, talking about the other choices, so I got a question about that. Why are the other ones wrong? So, if we think about C and B, the reason both of these are wrong is we don't have that comma. So, we're never actually splitting out this extra piece here. B is close. Thomas Young's famed double slit experiment, comma, considered truly groundbreaking for what it revealed about the nature of light, comma, is still performed regularly by physicists to this day. That would be correct. So B is close. It needs a comma here to do the work of splitting that sentence, though. It's not there. Now, A looks like it's doing it, but the problem is the wording here. Thomas Young's famed double slit experiment, to consider it truly groundbreaking for what it revealed about the nature of light, that feels like it's an intro to something else rather than a kind of like description of what we just said, right? I almost want to say to consider it truly groundbreaking, you have to be a physicist yourself, right? Like you have to know knowledge about physics in order to truly consider it groundbreaking yourself. It feels like it's about someone else who's never showing up in this sentence. So here, the wording of this is just making this clause wrong. And it seems weird to then completely remove the word consider. Personally, my best version of this would be if B had a comma, that's what I would have gone with. That's how I would have written this wacky sentence. But we just don't always get what we want. That's intentional as well. They're deliberately trying to give us sentences we would never write, sentences that we find very strange because they don't want our instincts to be useful. They want us to think about the actual rules involved. And so if we are only able to answer grammar questions based on instinct, we'll only get so far. So hopefully that is something we can hear a little bit with this one, but it does come down to, in a certain sense, it comes down to instinct because you have to be able to hear what constitutes a sentence and what constitutes an extra clause that we're inserting in that sentence. And a lot of times it just takes trial and error, trial and error. So keep that in mind. Does that answer your question? I hope. If not, let me know. Cool. So yeah, this is tough. If you're getting a grammar question wrong and it's this one, not the end of the world, but even though this is hard, I'd say this is still in that master the middle grouping of questions. That circle one that we did, if you're getting that wrong, if you're sacrificing that, I get it. But if we really want to be in reading 700 plus in our score, you really can't afford to get any grammar questions wrong. So that is a nice place if you're trying to master the middle to really make sure it's good. And just to go back here for a sec, exercises grammar, right? There's, again, these are all blank because this is my dummy account, but we've got the ones that are about specific rules like apostrophes, appositives, conjunctions. And then down here, grammar one, grammar two, grammar three, these are from the SAT question bank, and these are just random assortments of questions. So these are good for testing out not just do you know the rules, but can you identify which rule they're testing in a given situation? Because I think for most of you, you got a big boost on this one because I told you it was that to an ing rule. You wouldn't get that help on the actual test. So identifying the rule itself, really important. Cool. Any general questions on grammar? We're going to go back to math a little bit. I just want to make this point about the middle with some other things, kind of show you some things that we don't want to get wrong. We can come back to grammar. I do have more of those planned, so we'll see how it goes. But let's do this instead. This will be a quick one if you do have questions to think about them. So this is, again, one you wouldn't want to get wrong and you wouldn't want to be hesitant about. Soon as you see it, you got to know it's quadratics. And kind of like with grammar, with quadratics in very basic senses, we have very limited menu, right? What do we care about? We care about y-intercept, x-intercept, vertex, and direction. Now, there are some more complicated formulas, but in terms of like points, right? Lines are easy. We got slopes and y-intercepts. Quadratics a little bit more complicated, but even when there's a story, they're probably talking about one of these four things in some way. So, okay, hits the ground. When does it hit the ground? Which of these four on our menu seems to matter for that? Well, the question tells us, well, we've got the height and the time. So what's the height of the ground, right? That's y equals 0. When does y equal 0? X-intercept. So what do? I go right to my Desmos and I do y equals negative 4.9 x squared plus 30x plus 5. Hits the ground at 6.3. So 6.3 is my answer. Oh, some changes, some last minute changes. I caught some people. But yes, D is the answer, not C. Not C. Now I get why you put it, right? It's staring you right in the face in that equation. It feels really nice. And sometimes they do ask about the y-intercept, right? But you got to be careful there. Whether this is an easy or medium question, I don't really know. It doesn't really matter. You got to be thorough no matter what. So think about it, right? What are they telling you when they say it hits the ground? They're saying the y is equal to 0. The 5, that's like a starting height. That would be like the height of the initial height. Does it say like it's from a platform? Yeah, there, it even says platform that's 5 meters off the ground. So even in the question, they told you what the 5 meant. They told you the 5 is the height of the platform, and yet they're asking for when it hits the ground after. So yeah, another way to do this, I don't think it's more efficient, but you could also easily guess and check here. Just take these ones and just go through and put them in for T and then solve. That's a little bit more tedious in the world of Desmos. So I would just do this. And just as a reminder, we could also make it equal to 0, and that parabola becomes the vertical lines because it's now giving us the solutions. So there you go. And just as another reminder, since I'm staring at it, remember with stories, especially quadratic stories, we're not really interested in negative x-intercepts in most cases because that just doesn't really make sense. There's no negative time really in these stories, so it really doesn't make sense to have that. So there you go. But costly for getting this wrong. Let's jump around. Let's do. Here's one where you'd want to be quick with your process. Quick with your process. We're getting some answers here. Some right, some wrong. Why should we be quick with our process? Because I'm always thinking, do I have points? Do I have equations? Well, it seems like I have neither, but average, the mean or the average is the sum of the numbers over the number of numbers. So my dumb little brain is just, okay, well, they said 86% on 5 history exams, plug points into equations. So my average is 86. I don't know the sum, but it's 5 exams. And hey, if you're missing a piece of an equation, might as well solve for it. 86 times 5 is 430. So what do I do with that? I don't know. But plug points in equations. I have an 88 is another average, and that's 6 exams. So 88 is the sum over 6. 88 times 6. Sum of these 6 is 528. So what's the score she must earn on a sixth exam? Well, the sum is 528 for 6. The sum is 430 for 5. What if I just subtracted those two, right? That's the difference literally between the two situations. And that should be 98. And that's that. So in terms of mastering the middle, I'm glad many of you got this right. And many of you did get it right very quickly. That's awesome. And that's the key is when you're doing practice problems over this next week, don't just think about right and wrong as the only metric here. In fact, I actually forgot to say this at the beginning. It's an important point for this lesson. Basically, let me just type it. Uh, an important idea is that right isn't always right. Right isn't always right. Meaning, just getting a question right doesn't mean you did it right. Doesn't mean that you're in, no, it doesn't mean you're getting it in a way that's going to lead to score improvement. We have to be getting things right in ways that are fast and efficient because, yes, this is a time test. We are going to lose time in one question, might cost us another question down the road. So we're always thinking, how can I get as many questions right in the time limit and without making mistakes, without making careless errors, without skipping things we have a chance at? So for me, this is where the plug points and equations really helps. It just gives me something to think about at the beginning of every single question. And my brain is just programmed to think if I can put an equation on a page and throw some numbers into it, probably a good sign I'm going to get the question right. So as you're doing practice, like I said, try to think in those terms. Is not only am I getting it right, but did I stumble? Did I stare at the question for a while? Staring in math, very bad. If you're staring, you're not working, you're not solving, and that's clock time just ticking away for no gain. If you're plugging points in, you might not know what you're doing, but you're moving the question forward. So that's a lot of hard questions as well, is sometimes we don't know what we're doing, but if we just do it anyway, we get closer. So try to think in those terms as well. Let's do another. Oh, this is such a good one. Let's do this one first. Let's do this one first. Geometry. Here's a great example of a you must get this right question. We've seen stuff like this before, so you might have a slight memory of it, but as always, I'm thinking plug points and equations. And if you're thinking, what's my equation? Remember, they're giving you cylinder, right? It's this guy. And I'm almost done. Divide that, but doesn't matter either. So 16 is the height. So what is the ratio of the height of A to the height of B? 1 to 16. Classic, can't get it wrong. Right now, we should sense trouble on something like this right away. Anytime the SAT is asking you to change something, but they're not giving you the something, big sign that not only do we want to get some numbers in there and plug points into equations, but we probably need to arithmetize. How do I do 4 times nothing, right? How do I do 4 times some hypothetical value? Sure, I can use R and do 4R and square that, but anytime I'm using algebra, I'm doubling the number of things I need to think about. If I do algebra, I have to think about the numbers that are included and all the letters and how those things interact. If I arithmetize, then the letters go away and I only have one thing to worry about, which is the numbers. I made them up. And I just got to follow the rules, right? So they told me that the radius of A is 4 times the radius of B. So I did that right here, right? I made A 4 and B 1. Then, just for laziness' sake, I made the height of A 1. So I had something to solve with. And then I got the volume as 16 pi. And then it tells me that they have the same volume. So now I just plug points into equations again. It's a different cylinder, so it's a different volume equation, but it's the same basic stuff, right? 16 goes in there. That radius that I made up goes in there. And solve for the height. Just see what you get. And there it is, 16. And then even if I had a hunch, and I do have a hunch that 16, 1 to 16 is going to be the answer because I've seen this question before and I know, or I've seen versions of this question before. And I know that when we're dealing with areas and volumes, the units are going to start to behave in ways where the squaring is going to start to have an effect, or in certain cases, cubing something. So that changes what I might expect. But I don't, even if I have a hunch and even if I'm pretty confident in that hunch, I'm not going to risk getting this middle question wrong by saving what, 20 seconds? If I'm confident with arithmetize, this work is 20 seconds. So it's worth those 20 seconds to be sure I got this right. So mastering the middle is about speed, but it's also about accuracy. There are certain questions that, yes, you do not want to be getting wrong ever. This would be one of them. This would be one of them. Sorry to rub it in if you got it wrong, but better hear it now than after August 23rd. Now let's do one that might be a hard one, but I would say is a good kind of master the middle, kind of hard one. See what you can make of this. Couple ways to solve it, lots of ways, so be clever. But when in doubt, you know what I'm going to say. Plug points, new equations. You're all over the place with this one. Remember, plug points and equations. It's about lines. If you have scratch paper in front of you, then y equals mx plus b better be on it. I don't care that it's an obvious equation you can hold in your head. Take something out of your head, put it on the page, make space for something else. Plug points in equations. All right, we're starting to wind down with it, so I'll start explaining, but feel free to keep working. So first thing, plug points in equations. I got to recognize that when they say it passes through the origin, that's a point, right? The origin is 0, 0. And specifically, when I have y equals mx plus b on my page, I'm looking for a y-intercept, and that's what that is, right? Anytime that the x-coordinate of something is 0, that's the y-intercept. So that's awesome because now if I plug 0 in for b, it just goes away, right? So it doesn't matter anymore. So now my equation is simpler, y equals mx. And I'm, again, dumb about it. It's the beauty of plug points in equations. I'm just like, all right, well, follow the instructions. So c is the x and 4 is the y. So 4 is equal to mc. Well, that's a problem, right? Because having two letters doesn't really do me much good. But okay, again, I'm stupid about this. I'm just going to follow my instructions, plug points into equations. I got another point. So how about c is equal to m times 36? Now, at this point, I've solved my problem, right? If I have an equation with two variables, you're stuck. You can't solve that thing. But if you have an equation, if you have two equations with two variables, you can. And some of you are going to recognize that now if c is equal to m times 36, we can substitute this m times 36 in for the c here. You could do that. It's not that hard to do, but just as a kind of another way to show you a really cool thing, remember Desmos solves points of intersections for us really easily. So this is a point of intersection. Now, if I tried to plug this into Desmos, it's going to say, I already forgot. 4 equals MC and C equals M36. Okay. So equals M36 and oh my God, I keep forgetting. 4 equals MC. 4 equals MC. It doesn't know. It's confused by all this. It doesn't like this because it's not an X and a Y. And that's because, right, what is Desmos? It's a graphing calculator, XY plane. So let's just give it what it wants, right? So let's rearrange, or not rearrange, but relabel. Let's make C the X and M the Y so that now I can plug it into Desmos. And so we've got an X and a Y and a Y. And now it has no problem. It's graphing two things, and I just got to find some points of intersection. I see one here at 12, and it looks like a third, right? You should be able to read 0.3333 forever as a fraction. So that seems okay because that's a C and an M, and C is what they want, and 12 is an answer. So that's that. Um, you don't need to do that last step with Desmos, but I will say that a lot of times when things do get harder, I end up doing this. I plug points in and I get two equations that individually are like dead ends because they have two variables, right? You can't really solve a question with two variables. Maybe we could guess and check and start plugging the C's that they gave us into the answers in and start to figure things out that way. That works. But generally speaking, sometimes, especially if it's like a quadratic, we might do this plug points into equations and end up with long uh, equations that still have these two missing pieces. If we convert those letters that we're using back into X's and Y's, we can pop it in Desmos and solve, no matter what it looks like, right? This is a weird curve here. But as long as if we are doing that, just be careful that you don't forget which one they want. X and Y is your label. You have to make sure that whatever you label them, you're giving them what they want. Here, there's no real chance to confuse them because 1/3 isn't an answer. But that's really useful because solving a system of equations by hand is time consuming in a lot of cases. You have to do it in school, so you're programmed to start doing those algebra steps. But with Desmos, we have that ability to just treat it like a point of intersection. So that is there if we need it. If you have questions, ask them. But I would say this is a good example of a hard question that still falls in that master the middle grouping. And the reason is that what did I really do? What did I really need to know? I need to know what the origin was. Simple, basic math. I needed to know y equals mx plus b. Simple, basic math. I needed to know plug points into equations. simple basic SAT strategy. And then I needed to solve a system of equations, which even if I didn't use Desmos, not that hard to do. So individually, there's nothing hard about this. I think that the problem people have with something like this is they don't know where to start. They don't know how to bring all these pieces together. But I really want to stress that if I saw this on the test, I wouldn't know where to start either or I should say, I wouldn't know the full plan either. I would just mindlessly plug points in equations because that's what works. It's just a good move. So a lot of trouble on the middle questions comes from people not taking a chance on step one because some people need to know step two, step three, step four, step five before they even do step one. And if that's you, that's going to get you in a lot of trouble. You're going to spend a lot of time staring at things that you could easily solve if you just got the ball rolling. So step one, this is why we talk about dumb summaries. This is why we talk about plug points and equations. It gives us something to do. And the odds of it being the wrong thing to do are much lower than the odds that it's the right thing to do. So it's a good bet. And so just get the ball rolling. And as you write things on that scratch paper, I think you'll be surprised how often things just work out. So confidence, I guess. Cool. Any questions on this before we switch gears a little bit? Okay, so let's go back to some reading here, but we'll take it easy. Again, master the middle includes questions like this. Grammar, remember, for pacing reasons, is always what we're going to do first in every reading module, but then right after the grammar is the transition questions. And we also don't really want to get any of these wrong. So this one, easy in my opinion, but give it a shot. Come on. Oh, good. I am seeing some pretty good speed here. And just to clarify what I would do here, I would, with transitions, you can read the choices first, you can read the passage first. I don't think it matters much, but at some point in the process, you got to be doing the dumb summary versions. And one thing I noticed right away is both however and by contrast are but words. So remember our strategy with that is if they both mean the same thing, it is very unlikely that one of them is right and the other's wrong. And maybe it's obvious that you don't need a but word anyway, but I think it's nice to get rid of some garbage here. Then it remarkably is a little bit of a weirdo transition, fine. But in other words is one we need to be aware of. In other words means what it says. We are about to say the same thing we just said in other words. So if we look at it, this hoarding behavior ensures that they have adequate food supplies during the harsh winter months when fresh sources are scarce. Researchers have discovered that squirrels successfully relocate up to 95% of their buried acorns, demonstrating remarkable spatial memory skills that rival those of much larger brain mammals. Well, this is telling me that they store them. This is telling me that they find them. Those are not the same point. Those are different points. Oh, but you just changed it. Why? No. Leading you to this being the answer. B is the answer. In other words, is, like I said, very specific about what it means. We are saying the same thing, the same idea in other words, in different words. We are not adding to that idea. We are not doing a cause and effect with that idea. We are repeating, right? That's all it means. Remarkably, here is just doing like all right, well, it's an interesting fact, I guess, about squirrels. Like it's not really doing much here. It's just, it's right because nothing else is. And that can happen on these, right? There's a lot of these words fit into those basic categories of but, and, so, and for example. Some words like in other, or some phrases like in other words don't fit into that. And some like remarkably also don't fit. But I would say, I forget if I've said this before. In other words is, I don't know if it's the most common, but it's up there. It's one of the most common choices you will see in any transition question across the entire SAT. So I've done the math. I've gone through every transition question they've ever released. I've counted up all the number of instances that they use the word however, by contrast, in other words, all that. In other words is actually, however is the most common. In other words is though high on the list. But the most common wrong answer is in other words. Okay. However, it's also right sometimes. So it's not like you can just cross it out immediately and be like, oh, it's wrong. It's always wrong. It's sometimes right. But for the frequency with which it shows up, it is wrong more often than any other word. It's just, it's not a good bet, especially if you're confused. But I think it's because, and maybe this is why some of you picked we forget what it means. We think it just means, oh, here's more information. But no, it's very literal. It means we're saying the same thing in other words. So we're not adding to it in any way. And so most of the time it's wrong because we are adding, we are transitioning into some new idea. And so this is a little too literal. But just as always with things on the SAT, there's always exceptions and just be aware of what's going on. But if you were stuck between B and C, just placing a smart bet, B is the better bet, even if you've never seen the passage, just because of the way it works. Yeah, transition questions also are ones we want to have a high accuracy rate, if not perfection on. Let's do another. Here we go. And one thing to pay attention to as you're doing this one is how quickly can you categorize these answer choices into their dumb summary versions. If you are slow on that or you are not sure, that's an avenue for improvement. That's something to master. All right, you guys are quick here. That's good. What does this do? New chat? No. Okay. So just to show you how quick it needs to be, if you are looking at this question within seconds, you need to be going, okay, therefore is so, nevertheless is but, likewise is, and for instance is for example. Then it might be obvious what you need. Let's take a look anyway. During the Bone Wars, these people became bitter rivals in their quest to discover new dinosaur species in the American West. Their competition grew so intense they began sabotaging each other's excavation sites and bribing workers to spy on rival digs. Sounds bad. Both scientists made groundbreaking discoveries that significantly advanced our understanding of prehistoric life, including the identification of over 130 dinosaur species between them. Sounds good. How do we move from bad to good? Probably, but we could test out some other things too, right? I mean, if we thought it was therefore, throw that in there. Their competition grew so intense that they began sabotaging each other's excavation sites and bribing workers to spy on rival digs. So both scientists made groundbreaking discoveries. So they're bribing other people and that caused them to make groundbreaking discoveries. Those are not cause and effect situations, right? And it's not an example. Them discovering things is not an example of them bribing people and sabotaging each other's stuff. So yeah, maybe this is an easy one, but I think it's a good example of not only does it need to be a right answer, but it needs to be quick. And thinking about these words and these terms is really important. And so if you're struggling with what does nevertheless mean, you're adding time to a solution that you really can't afford. Um, I'll also add that kind of in other words before, words that mean and are usually our last resort. They're not always wrong, but they tend to be wrong because and words don't really add much to a sentence or a passage. They don't really bring in like that kind of extra meaning that a so or a but would bring in. So they're right when everything else is wrong. They're rarely transitions at all. So if you were debating between B and C, my advice is just go with the one, especially if you think it fits, that's a but or a so or for example. But these are right occasionally, so just be careful. Plus, likewise basically is more like similarly, so it does have a little bit extra meaning than some other and words. Cool. All right, one more of these and then we'll wind down. Probably with some grammar. Let's see. Let's do this one. Ooh, this is a good one. I see wrong answers. I see bookmarks. This is awesome. This is such a good example of master the middle. Such a good example. This would give me no trouble at all. And I'll show you why, but this is a good one for saving points and saving time. Oof. This one's a bit of a bloodbath. All right. I'm gonna reveal this before I start explaining it because I wanted to see how where we end. So if you have an answer, pick it in the next 10 seconds. Feel free to bookmark as always. Good. Okay. Locked in. And let's see how we do. A lot of wrong answers. So that's you. Again, don't feel too bad, but this is a great learning experience for everyone, right? As soon as I see this, again, sometimes I read the passage first, sometimes I read the choices first and start categorizing them. It depends on my mood. But either way, I'm going to do both steps, right? So, for example, obviously, is a for example word. That's nice and easy. In particular, also, for example. And so suddenly, just like that, I've doubled my odds of getting it right, even if I just guess randomly, because those two words mean the same thing. So they can't both be right. If they mean the same thing, they both have to be wrong, right? So that kind of forces my hand. That is tricky. Furthermore, though, is and. That is more in other words. It's basically repeating stuff. So it's in that category of repeating things. So if I go here, right, when developing early photographic portraits in the 1850s, Victorian photographers employed careful lighting techniques to achieve the dramatic effects their wealthy clients desired. They would position multiple oil lamps at precise angles around the subject to create deep shadows and highlight facial features in flattering ways. They placed reflective metal sheets behind the lamps to intensify and direct the light onto specific areas of the subject's face and clothing. Well, those both sound like things that they're doing, but this is why A and B were wrong, even if I didn't use that strategy of them being the same category and both being wrong, is placing the metal sheets is not an example of them placing the oil lamps. Those are separate things. They're both maybe examples of the careful lighting techniques that they're using, but they're two different examples. And I would have recognized that as I'm going through because I've got this little advantage of categorizing these words. I'm also recognizing that was the trap all along. They know that they're giving me a passage where there's examples. And so my brain is really drawn to something like, for example, we really want that because they are examples. But remember, the transition is in a specific spot. And we have to make sure we're relating the two sentences on either side. And notice that when I read these sentences, I'm not filling that blank in. I'm reading the two sentences without a transition because I'm trying to understand it on my own. and then I'm going to use the choices to see what might fit. Sometimes I have a natural instinct. Here I do not. I know it's not an example though because of that strategy. It's not in other words, or that is because it's also not repeating the same thing. It's a second example. Furthermore, just means, and there's no reason, like I said, I would have picked it because it's usually my last resort. But in this case, it was my last resort, and I had no other choice. So, furthermore, makes sense. They did two things. They would position the oil lamps and they would place the metal sheets. It fits. It's a bad, weak transition, but it's the only choice that works. So, this is a great example of the kind of thing to prioritize this week. It's definitely hard, but we have some very predictable things that we can use to make it more in that zone of easy and medium, right? That this strategy here is so important. And then from there, just thinking about the potential traps that show up in these things. They do love to create a passage that maybe overall involves examples or overall involves a contrast, but it might not be a contrast at that spot. It might not be an example at that spot where the blank is. So just pay attention to that. That's a common trap. It's a predictable one. And so we can hopefully avoid it if we see it coming sometimes. Really good one. Before we'll do one more question, we'll do something easy like grammar, but I just do want to show you, since it seems to be important. If you go to transitions and we go to quizzes, these, I think I talked about this one last time or two times ago, maybe top 20 transitions. This is a must ace quiz. You got to get 100% on this. And you should, if you've gotten 100% before and it was 2 weeks ago, do it again, get another 100%. This one is so important. It's going to force you to categorize the 20 most common transition words. Most of them are those basic categories, but, and, so, for example. Some of them are like in other words though. And so again, this is the result of my analysis of all the questions. So I did all the math. These are the ones that come up most often. But then if you're up for it, this quiz has the 48 other transition words that I've seen in SAT questions. So you could just pick a random 5 or let it pick them for you, or you can do all 48. And if you're really trying to master those transition questions, you really don't ever want to get one wrong because you don't know what the transition phrase means. They're all gonna, for the most part, be more advanced versions of very simple phrases like and, but, and so. So you really want to be able to categorize them. I will say there are probably ones that could show up on the SAT that aren't on this quiz because I never saw them. But if you've mastered these 48 and these 20, there's not going to be much they can slip by you. And so that should be enough to be really confident. So that's a really good thing to do if you're trying to make sure you're not getting those kinds of questions wrong. Highly recommend. All right, let's end on a grammar question here. Something fun. Here it is. You can identify the grammar rule. You've basically already solved it. All right, so our rule here, modifiers. I know that before I look at that passage in any way, because I know modifiers, what's the distinctive feature of them? If you've done this lesson, watch my lesson video on it, you know that modifiers questions have answer choices that are long and jumbled. And oh boy, are these long, and oh boy, are they jumbled, right? So this is a very recognizable rule based on the choices, right? Every other grammar question, the choices are like 3 words long and maybe not even changing in any way, just the punctuation changing. So this is a very easy to recognize rule. And what are we supposed to do? we have a modifier, intro clause at the beginning of the sentence, right before the blank, and we have to turn that into a question. And the answer to that question is basically what the blank has to be about. Now, this one has a little bit of a twist because there's two clauses here, but let's see if we can untwist it. Composed in the style of a dream vision, a popular genre during the medieval period. Well, this is just a little a positive that's adding more info, but the real modifier here, the one that I'm focused on, is this: composed in the style of a dream vision. So, what is composed in the style of a dream vision? The poem, right? Not Wendover. He's not composed in the style of a dream vision. He's a guy. The Black Death's arrival? No, that's an event, not a poem. After the Black Death arrived in London, Wendover, what? The poem's all the way buried at the end. Wendover's only poem. So yes, it looks like it starts with Wendover, but remember that apostrophe. This is a very common twist with the modifier's questions. The apostrophe S affects what we're talking about. We're actually talking about the poem. And now, without really even reading beyond the first word or two, I've got my answer. It is D. I would, of course, double check and just throw it in there. And yeah, it sounds fine if I put it in. But this is a good example where if you don't know what rule this is and you're just reading all four of these answer choices, you're wasting a lot of time and you're potentially walking into some sort of trap because sometimes the right answer to these modifier questions does not sound like good English, but it is the only answer that works because we need that modifier to be followed by the thing it's modifying. This descriptive clause has to be followed by what it's describing. So the poem is the only thing that works here. D was the only thing on the table at all. So again, another question where it's not just about right and wrong. It's how confident you are in that question. It's how efficient you are with this type of question. If you really want a 700 plus in reading, grammar, transitions, and outlines basically need to be perfect and be very confident. So something to think about if you are trying to target stuff, that's a good place to do it. If you're starting to get beyond that, if you already mastered that kind of stuff, then time to start doing the things that are a little bit less for your buck. Master those vocab words. I keep adding more. And not many of you even looked at this. So make sure you go to these because if you get stuff wrong in vocab because you don't know the words, that sucks. But now that's going to be more of what step 8 is going to be about, is these kind of little more annoying things that if you really want to get those hardest questions, you got to do this kind of work. So still plenty of time before the August SAT. Hopefully this kind of gave you confidence. If you did get some of these wrong that I called easy, I hope it didn't hurt your feelings. I'm trying to inspire you to really focus on the right stuff and to mostly to encourage you that these things are easy or easier, even if they don't feel that way. So there's probably points that you can easily get by just focusing on this stuff. Don't worry about the hard stuff. We can do that next week. Make sure that easy and medium stuff is down, and then the hard stuff will also be easier for you. That's all I've got. If you've got questions, feel free to stick around and ask. But otherwise, I'll see you guys next week. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If you have questions, feel free to go for it.
Yeah, I got one. How long should you spend on like each grammar question, each like writing question?
Roughly 45 seconds, though some should be a couple seconds. Some should be maybe 20. If we get one of those singular plural verb things where we know we can do the singular 3 versus 1 thing, that could be a couple seconds. Generally, I like to think of it as, let's go back. You're better off thinking about the writing section as not so much grammar needs to be a certain time, but overall the grammar, transitions, and outlines should be about 10 minutes total. That would leave you with 20 or so for the passages and the vocab. Because just basically the grammar, transitions, outlines, it's usually not the same like ratio of one to the other. So I tend to group them together. And ideally in that 10 minutes, you're getting 0 wrong. Ideally. 1 wrong, not the worst thing, but 0 would be the best way to really increase the chance you get a 700 plus if that's what you're going for. Yeah.
All right.
That answer your question? Is that cool?
Yeah, that answered. Thank you.
Cool. Cool. No problem. No problem. Just got one in the chat, which is asking, struggling with strong words and passage questions. Yeah, I'm still getting 70-80% of most. That's good. That's good. So the strong words thing is hard because it's just hard to explain sometimes. It comes down to noticing the right stuff. Um, I actually think that those transition questions can help a lot, even though those passages are short and the transition is all that matters. In a lot of the longer passages, the transition words are the strong words that matter the most. So I always say the most important word in any passage is but, however, nevertheless, despite this, any sort of like contrast word has to stick out because almost certainly that is going to impact our answer choice, our dumb summary, all that stuff. So if you're missing those things, that's a problem because that's what the passage might hinge on. Otherwise, if you're noticing any pattern when you get them wrong in why you're getting them wrong, is it because I'm noticing a word that you're not noticing? Is it that you noticed the word but didn't know the definition of the word? That might mean just study more vocab. And if it's more, are you missing a word that's in the passage that's important? Are you missing a word that's in the choice that's important? Usually it's the choices where the work is done. I find that when most people get stuff wrong, it's not that they didn't misunderstand, it's not that they misunderstood the passage, it's that they didn't notice something important in the choice. So you're getting the buts, other transition words, so examples, things like that. I understand the problem. It's hard for me as well. So maybe that's the best way to put it is sometimes you miss things. On the test, I'm also missing things occasionally too because I have to go fast. For me, I am always doing more work in the choices. So I would say that's maybe the best place is if I see an answer choice that has a strong word, I'm going to go hunting for that idea in the passage. So I might have missed that important idea early on when I first read it, but it doesn't bother me as much because if it mattered, it'll come up again in the choice. But remember too, they're not going to repeat themselves exactly. They don't like to copy paste things, or at least not in the right answers. A lot of wrong answers will copy some odd phrase from the passage, paste it in a wrong answer so that you're drawn to that wrong answer because you're like, oh, it's up here, it's down there. So that sometimes is a sign of a trap. But more important is not necessarily copying the word, but copying the idea. And I think of words as synonyms, but also other ideas that orbit around each other. So it doesn't have to be an exact synonym, but if they're talking about, I don't know, if they say in a choice that something is surprising, and then in the passage they're saying they had an, I don't even know what would be it. This is maybe a little too synonym-y, but unexpected result, or maybe even just they say something like it something contradicted a previous theory. All these ideas orbit around each other. They're all saying that we had some expectation and it got missed. And so those words are going to stand out to me because they have a strong meaning, no matter what the word is. The idea is very powerful. We will do more of this next week, so that might be a way to help too. But I would say in the meantime, if you go back to where is it? Uh, oh, here, the video. Here. This one is really good. This is one of the best lessons I ever made. It's under strategies and videos. It's this trap answers thing. This is really just giving that overview of those categories that we use, and those do show up as well. You might want to try this in the oh, gosh darn it, in here using the training mode for a passage question. It also has these categories. You'll notice that a lot of them have to do with relationships, counting things, comparing things, the relationship of time. Something must be true versus could be true, right? So a lot of them have to do with the relationship between items, not the items themselves. So I would say that's a good way to maybe train your brain to start noticing the right stuff. Because I wouldn't memorize this list, but I would memorize the list of categories, the list of types of traps. And that lesson on the trap answers is really good for that. So, any other specific questions for now? I wish I could be more like definitive about it, but this is one of the hardest things. It's very based on feeling. Anything else? Okay, I'll keep thinking on it. We will do more of this next week, so don't worry about that. But I would say that's your best bet. if you notice any patterns, if you're doing any and you notice things, use the chat in here. Just as soon as you do it, give me a chat and just maybe give me, I don't know, the topic of the passage, something that I could use to find the passage quickly, or a link to the video or whatever. And then I can see maybe more clearly what you're doing and maybe give stronger advice. So I check it every day. So feel free to use that. Cool. No problem.